Good afternoon. I'm Ann Strauss from Modern and Contemporary Art here at the Met, and I welcome you to the museum and to today's program. We are fortunate indeed to have here today someone who can speak with truly colossal intelligence about art, his own art, and the art of others. And that someone is Sean Scully, whose exhibition, Sean Scully Wall of Light, opened here at the Met several weeks ago and will be on view through January 15th. The exhibition was organized by Stephen Bennett Phillips of the Phillips Collection, Washington, who is here with us today and who lectured quite brilliantly about Scully only this afternoon earlier in this auditorium. Here at the Met, it was an extraordinary privilege and pleasure to install the exhibition in collaboration with Sean Scully in galleries on the mezzanine level of the Lila Atchison Wallace Wing, used for the first time for a special exhibition since the wing's opening in 1987. The generosity of Metropolitan Museum trustee Paula Cusi, as well as Ignacio Garza Medina, made the presentation of this exhibition possible, for which the museum is most grateful. Corporate support was provided by UBS, for which the museum is also grateful. Thank you as well to Gallery Lalonde for its assistance, especially to Mary Sabatino, Jean Fremont, Mark Hughes, and Lindsay McDonald. The Metropolitan Museum has had a relationship with and commitment to Sean Scully since 1985, when the Met was the first U.S. museum to purchase a painting by him, Malloy, of 1984. Since then, we have acquired work by Scully in the various mediums in which he works: oil painting, pastel, watercolors, printmaking, and photography. Scully has spent considerable time at the Met since 1975, when he moved from London to New York and established New York as his home base, although maintaining studios in Europe, first in London and currently in Barcelona and outside Munich. Here at the Met, Scully has seriously studied the works of old and modern masters, from early Renaissance Italian painting and Velázquez, to Cézanne and Matisse, to de Kooning and the abstract expressionists, to single out just a few. Scully, having come to international prominence in the 1980s, is a painter of the highest order and has achieved an international reputation as one of the foremost painters to work in the abstract tradition. Appropriately, his Wall of Light exhibition, with 30 paintings and 30 works on paper from his Wall of Light series, his most important thematic series to date, is here at the Met, whose collections and exhibitions celebrate art of the highest level of achievement. Following Sean's talk today, we will show a film, Sean Scully, American Beauty, directed by Philip McGovern in 2000, made for Irish television. And later in the run of the show, on December 17th, there will be another Sunday at the Met program with leading scholars, authors, critics, philosophers, all that they are, Arthur Danto and Irving Sandler, both of who are with us today. And there are flyers in the entrance of the auditorium that will give you details about that program, December 17th, 3 p.m. And now I give you Sean Scully speaking about his own work, primarily Wall of Light, as well as a few other artists whose work he admires and respects. Sean, it's all you.
Hi. I talked for about an hour and a quarter today. That's all right with you. I've shown a lot in Kunsthalles in Europe, and there they have wooden seats. Doesn't make any difference to me, of course, but I'm glad you are advantaged. Showing a classy museum, you get classy seats. Okay, so if we could start, that would be groovy. So how do I do that? Press a button.
Two top ones. Yeah, there you go.
Good. All right. And the slides are, of course, needless to say, fabulously out of order. Thank you, Metropolitan Museum. And this was achieved without sponsorship of UBS. However, as a painter, you know it's always necessary to improvise, and I will do just that. Painting on the left is called Bend, 1971. Painting on the right is called Inset, first inset painting. So let's see if I can find the one that's supposed to be there. Marvelous.
We'll reset. You went too far at the beginning.
I did?
Looking for your first line.
Yeah, I went too far by pressing the button once. Is that it?
You held it down too long.
Okay.
It should be there.
All right. Yep. Okay, one on the right is called Backcloth, one on the left is called Bend. So these paintings demonstrate my original interest in rhythm and the beautiful effect that lines achieve when they're put next to each other. After a very exciting trip to Morocco, 1970, I believe, I came up and passed Paris, and there I saw a very important exhibition by Jesus Raphael Soto in the Musée d'Art Moderne Hôtel de la Ville. And that, in a sense, pushed the influence of Morocco into the contemporary, contextualized it into the contemporary. And when I left for my trip, I was making calligraphic paintings, but when I returned, I started to make paintings more or less exclusively with stripes. I have worked with that pretty much exclusively since. And what I've tried to do is to deepen my relationship with a simple motif without causing myself to have to change direction. But I have attempted over time to, in some way, identify myself, immerse myself with the subject matter so that it becomes slowly transformed through a process of devotion, will, and imagination, thus causing a gradual and authentic evolution. The painting on the left, of course, shows you know, they look like big S's. So it looks like the surface of the water. It looks like something bent. And the one on the right, of course, is made with horizontals and verticals, and therefore it's a city painting. I'm sorry for the hissing, but it's not my fault. I didn't do this. Only responsible for the words. I'm sorry. Anyway, so I worked on these while I was at school, and you will see over time how things evolve. One on the left is by John Constable, painted in 1821, and it's a picture of Hampstead Heath. And this is more or less where I grew up. I grew up in London after we left Ireland. I wanted to show you this painting because for two reasons. One is there's a fantastic show on right now in the National Gallery in DC, which allowed me to see Constable in a way that I never saw him before. If you like train rides, you can go and see it. And the other reason is that I wanted to illustrate the difference between where I grew up, which is a literary culture, and what I looked at, which was France, which is also a literary culture, but a very great painting culture. You can see the painting on the left, it's painted with a kind of brutality. And Hampstead Heath is covered with a giant sky that changes every 20 minutes, as it does in England. And in Ireland, of course, it rains even more than it does in England. That's where I come from. And both of those cultures are essentially romantic and literary. The painting on the right is by Cézanne, who in a way is my model. In many ways, he's my model. His durability, his devotion, his willfulness has a parallel in my own ideal. With Cézanne, you know, you get mountains, and then besides mountains, you get mountains of apples. But the subject matter changes very little, and he is a builder of paintings. He said, all I have is my little thrill, and I would describe what I have with humility in relation to him as a very big thrill. I have a very big thrill when I paint because it's an arena of activity. I work on a giant scale a lot of the time. When I was in Italy once, I was looking out of a window. This was in Umbria. I looked out of the window for a very long time, and time passed ever so quickly. And I noticed that in the 30 minutes I was looking out the window, that the landscape I was looking at had not changed at all. It was as if I was looking at a painting. And of course, there is something very still in Italian painting, certainly from the Quattrocento, Piero della Francesca up to Giorgio Morandi. And it's this permanence of light that seems to provoke the culture of painting. Matisse said of New York that it has the most beautiful light in the world, and it does have a bright, constant light. It's very interesting to me that I grew up in a culture that produced, I would say, two great painters, Constable and Turner. And it seems to me that the environment in which we live creates the art that comes out of it. And there's something in the light of Italy and the light of France that is still, that provokes the visual. Painting on the left is Long Light, 1998. And this painting now lives in Bologna, which seems very appropriate to me because it is a painting of long light. And there you see I distort distance by changing the scale of the same unit and inserting it into a larger field. So I'm destroying space in a certain sense, and I'm destroying time. So therefore, I am interested in, besides simultaneous viewpoint, impermanence, a durability, the eternity, the eternal now, the eternal sense of light. The painting on the right, one that was up there in the first place, was called Inset Number 2, and painted in 1973. You can see from this painting that the inset challenges the hegemony of the grid. So it's a grid being challenged by a grid. All over painting, in my opinion, requires, in a sense of acceptance or submission to a pictorial structure of one kind or another. So you have a system, you have a way of doing something, you accept the consequences. But it's interesting to me that even in 1974, when I was still in England, I still hadn't arrived in the United States, I questioned this. I was still, in a sense, fighting for the figure. The figure is pushing itself into the bottom of the painting. And it's either the figure or the window or the other viewpoint. And this is something that stayed with me constantly all my working life. The idea of questioning the inevitable field of painting, puncturing holes in it, putting figures into it, whatever. But I've never truly accepted the idea of the field. I've never submitted to that. And that, I think, has given my work its essential character. So now I wanted to talk a little bit about Europe, America, and also what I consider to be authentic development, as opposed to change. There are two de Kooning paintings there. One is called Easter Monday, 1956, and the other one, beautiful painting on the right, 1975, whose name was writ in water, therefore dealing with mortality, our mortality. And you will see that the painting on the right, of course, is less angular, more circular, more rhythmical, perhaps less urban than the painting on the left. But the difference between the two paintings is slight when one considers that they are 19 years apart. But that's how long it takes to get from one to the other with work, if one works within one's own gestalt. If one plows one's own field, in other words. And I think of painting in relation to travel as being the equivalent of walking. You can get there quicker, of course, but then that's a different experience. With painting, you're always touching the material of life, and you work your way through the material, and the material enters you, your body and your soul, and with devotion, with love, with commitment, with imagination, you get from one to the other, but it takes a long time. And here's an example by the artist who I consider to be really the greatest after the Second World War. I also identify with him because the slowness of de Kooning's acceptance into the American mindset was, I think, in some degree caused by his lack of obvious conceptual clarity. In other words, in relation to Jackson Pollock, his fantastic painting, let's say number 32, black and white one, where he stands over the painting and he simultaneously unifies drawing and painting by dripping paint onto bare canvas, you have a closure that is extremely elegant. And it looks radical. Barnett Newman zips look radical. De Kooning's paintings were carrying more baggage, they're more complicated, and the entry is more complicated. So it took longer, but I believe he looks pretty fantastic now. On the left is a painting called Hidden Drawing, 10-175. And on the right is a painting called 1994 Union White. The painting on the left was made at the very end of my life in London, just before I left to come to America. It's made with masking tape. It's quite conceptual in a sense because it's a process painting. I painted over in layers, ripped out the tape, and accepted the results. And there you get some very interesting painterly effects that are joined with utter fidelity to the process of the painting, thus obeying the canon of process art, which was very prevalent in the 70s with land art and all sorts of other stuff. Painting on the right, you'll see that the squares are emptied out of line and filled with emotion or the materiality of light. And the difference in date between these two paintings is identical to the difference in date between the two de Koonings. So this is the point I wanted to make, that it takes that long to get from the left painting to the right painting, but as you can see, they stand for very different values. Painting on the right is much more mystical. much more contemplative. It's less optical, it's less structured, and of course, line has submitted to body. Same thing is true here. On the left is small, pale mirror. And on the right is horizontals, brown, blue, 1976. Again, the difference between these two paintings is 19 years. But what I have not abandoned is the central concept behind the work. I've always been interested in the mirror, in the double you, the double us. How we reflect each other, or how the painting reflects us, how one side of the painting critiques the other side of the painting, going back to the idea of Narcissus, of course, and the reflected self. You see the painting on the left is very poetic in the way that the brushstrokes are put down and in the way that the paint from underneath is allowed to come up. The painting on the right is much more disciplined and infinitely more detailed. It is a painting of nocturnal light. At that time I was shooting pool at night for my income. I used to go out at 10 and get back at 4 a.m. with my winnings and buy the paint with which I painted the paintings, if I won, that is. And I spent a lot of time in New York nightlight when I was making these paintings, and I did this for about 5 years. So I also purged myself during this time of Europe. And this was profoundly important to me, not just to come to America, but to be in America, not to come with what I had, but to allow America to be in New York, not America, I'm in New York, to allow New York to change me. And however much New York is like Europe, it's not Europe. It's much more frontal, much more stripped down. So I did this. I noticed that other people were coming to America too from Europe at that time, and hardly any of them stayed. And I think that the price that I was willing to pay affected the outcome later on. And the price was great, because I love to work with color. But I worked in a way that was almost painful for 5 years. I disciplined myself to make these paintings and to make these very subtle relationships. Painting on the left is called Malloy, 1984. Painting on the right is Murphy. So I think I'm going to read you some fun stuff now, if you don't mind. When I was 7, I lived in 82 Highbury Hill with my 2 cousins, identical twins, same age as me almost, who were and are really my sisters. And following on timidly was my little brother Tony. He was always shy, so he was always last through the door. No matter the door, he was always last. Anna was sometimes first, but only when mounting a challenge to the superior charisma of Leslie. On Highbury Hill, there lived a lot of old Irish ladies, right after the Second World War. It's more or less a straight hill up to the pub, which could easily have been called Irish Hill, except that if it were an Irish hill, it wouldn't have been straight, psychologically. Across the street from us in our big house full of Irish people and a Jewish couple, Auntie Nan and Uncle Vic, who was a transvestite comedian, was another house that was more or less filled with Irish people. One of these was a grand, mysterious old lady who loved to give us gifts. She would affectionately and with great understanding of the special moment invite us down to her magic cellar. There, opening a huge wooden chest, she would especially and very particularly select the gift of the day. One, I remember, was a worn-out but noble lady's pink shoe. On another occasion, we were especially gifted a formally grand, decorated with flowers, ceramic milk jug with a hole in the bottom. A fine milk jug with a fine hole. As in Beckett, with the most economic of means, we were left honoured, happy and bewildered by the meaning of things, by the meaning of one shoe, perhaps formerly owned by an Irish queen, and who among us was to wear it, and how would that be as a thing in the world? How would that be in the comic, elevated sense? And collapsing the figure ground once more, what would it be to pour milk into a jug that would obligingly pour it onto the floor? Or was it abstract and the symbol of a fine intention? She called us loves, dears, darlings, and we were mystified and touched. We skipped out of the house, Tony last, through the door, flattered, bemused, running up the road as little philosophers. So I read you a couple of other things I wrote about these paintings from this time, because I'm going to be in an exhibition in the Pompidou and it's dedicated to Beckett, so I was thinking about these paintings in relation to Beckett. I made a painting called Falling Wrong. I also made a painting called How Not. Then I made a painting called Any Questions. All these paintings are big and they are all physical, thus being assertive. They assert that they are falling wrong and not right, and they demonstrate how not to do a thing, how not to make a painting, how not to paint stripes. They call for any questions, and not any questions are answered. Any questions is big and black and white. That's falling wrong. So it is austere, but it is not calm. That's any questions. It abuses a system of 1, 2, A, B, if you like, or black, white, but it does not arrive at order. It is broken apart and then it is put back together. Then it is bolted against a big painted box that is black figure on a white ground. One is lonely, one is broken but reconstructed, and they are obliged by me to spend an eternity together. They are a relationship that is a question, thus any questions. Going back again to falling wrong. In a creative sense, falling wrong is better than falling right. Falling right is codified. If not, we wouldn't know it was right and you wouldn't be able to win a medal for it. Similarly, second prize is better than first prize. First prize implies down, second prize implies up and down. Falling wrong is beautiful, because no one knows how it will end, and no one can prove how beautifully wrong it is. Falling wrong has a million possible forms and faces. Falling right is incarcerated into one. So at this time, I was thinking about all these mad relationships. They look like crazy flags that represent countries that don't exist. And I used the system of order, in a sense, to create disorder, or to create a kind of anarchy, things that don't quite fit together. These are the paintings that I made in the mid-80s. There's the second version, that was made in the mid-90s. And here's the third version, which I made last year. So Any Questions is a painting that is full of questions. Obviously, I can't finish it. So I've been making it so far for 20 years. At that time, I also made this statement. The artist who can provoke empathy is the one who simply completes your thought or makes visible our desire, yours and mine. I'm not trying to say anything different from what you want to say. I want to say the same thing. I want to make visible what we feel, not just what I feel, but what we feel. I want my paintings to be obvious so that when you see them, you feel that I have painted something that you were thinking yourself, as if I have stolen the thought from you. This is what I mean by empathy. This is something that I said in 1986. And these paintings are all from around the mid-80s, including Murphy there. And I describe Murphy as a huge field that has a figure in a sense, pinned down on the right side. So, of course, American art, at least the kind of American art that I was interested in, which was abstraction, had been in the business of making non-relational paintings in a certain sense, getting rid of the European burden of relationships, composition, and so on. There are many famous cases of Barnett Newman railing against Mondrian because Mondrian made relational paintings, and so did Barnett Newman. But anyway, we won't delve too deeply into that, lest we cause discomfort. However, it is clear that the stripes are placed, therefore put in a special place, therefore in some way composed, thus in some way compositional. Anyway, so moving on from this, you see all the versions of Any Questions. By the way, I got Any Questions from a fantastic rock concert that I saw in Carnegie Hall, 57th Street. Talking Heads. David Byrne was singing on a stage just like this, wearing a wonderful loose-fitting felt suit. And he looked kind of crazy, jumping up and down on the stage, and the concert was really beautiful. At the end, he said, "Any questions?" I thought it was great, because any questions about rock and roll is really in the business of destroying sense. So to ask for any questions was interesting. So I made a painting that makes no sense, because these two things don't fit together, and it's called, therefore, Any Questions. Now, these two paintings are once again concerned with the reassertion of the figure. I always revisit the figure. I never give up on the figure. One is called Figure in Orange. The other one, that's 2004, and the other one is called Chelsea Figure. 2006, Chelsea Figure was painted in Chelsea. Figure in Orange was painted in my studio in Germany, in the countryside. And as you see, I make paintings with holes in them. Now, whether that has anything to do with that milk jug with a hole in the bottom, I'm not sure. But you could describe them as, it's a nice painting with a hole in it. Therefore, perhaps an argument with a hole in it, who knows? But the paintings have these insets that assert the separateness of the window, of the figure. It causes a kind of cut edge, and it breaks, attacks the romance of the painting. Which brings me to a very interesting point. I think that what I learned from America, to a large degree, was to be hard in the head. And I am a very romantic person and a very sentimental person. But in order to represent deep feeling, going back to Cézanne, I think that there has to be something in the painting that is willing to be hard, to be tough-minded. There is a relentless simplicity, a simpleness about my paintings that asserts itself again and again. I also wanted to show another way of looking at repetition, non-repetition. These photographs are walls, photos of walls that I took on the Aran Islands in 2005. This one on the left is Inis-Ia, that's a little island, and then the one on the right is Inis-Man, that's the middle island, Man being middle. And you see how beautiful the stones are and how the walls are built, obviously to serve a function, to keep the wind out and to keep the animals in. But they are wildly personal. even though when you first look at them, they all look the same. But they're not the same. You see, this one has a kind of horizontality in the way that the stones are put together. It's quite neutral, horizontal and vertical. It seems to be evenly distributed. But you see the one on the left, it's extremely vertical. So even the wall builders have styles. They look like fantastic drawings. Yeah, now this guy was on the island at the time, took me for a long walk to show me the wall on the right from Inishmore. And he said, I want to show you something that proves that you come from Arran, which I don't. But this is Ireland, so, it's, whatever. So, I come from Dublin. That's why I'm so cosmopolitan. I'm naturally cosmopolitan. So, we go walking across all the fields, and guess what? He forgot where it was. And it took us 4 hours to find the wall on the right. But it's beautiful, isn't it? I mean, it's fantastic. The way that the stones are composed, the decisions that were made by a farmer, not by a land artist, by a farmer. And the one on the left, which is vertical, it almost looks like a Kooning. Anyway, so this says something about why repetition is not repetitive. It is not. This is a wall I made in response. I made that for the University of Limerick. And I chose black and white, and I stacked it, black and white, relentlessly. So the middle is the same as the outside. This has a lot to do with my paintings. The paintings that I make are layered very honestly, I hope. And what is at the back is the same stuff that's at the front. It goes all the way through. There's a constant sense of integrity of material here. And as you see in the illustration on the right of this wall, there is an inset. There's an area where the stones are polished and they react differently to the weather. And of course, since there's so much weather in Ireland, it's quite kinetic, because some days it's grey, some days it's black and white. When I was a kid, I used to go to the seaside with my mum and dad, like lots of kids. And we used to buy this material to eat, if we were good, that was called rock. And rock was a long stick of candy that was red on the outside and white on the inside. And it used to say, Brighton. And when you bit it off, it said Brighton. So you would bite another piece off and it would say Brighton. So it said Brighton all the way through. I thought this was great. That means that the letters were the same length as the stick of rock, stick of candy. And that's what I did with sculpture. It's the same at the front as it is at the back. The end of it, end on, looks like one of the road paintings. This is another set of paintings that I work on, which of course is not in the exhibition Wall of Light. And a friend of mine, Peter Marzio, said that what's interesting about these paintings is that the paint has to do more work. In the Wall of Light paintings, drawing is considerably more animated, because the Wall of Light paintings are not a grid, as we will see in a minute. I'll change one of these, change that one. And you can see, looking at this painting on the left, Wall of Light April, against big grey robe, or big dark robe, big grey robe on the right, 2002, that the drawing in the robe painting is really a grid. Therefore, the paint is obliged to do everything, to give the painting life. This, I think, has something to do with my relationship with the Jasper Johns of 40 years ago, who is the Jasper Johns that I respond to. Jasper Johns painted rows of numbers, flags, targets. In other words, banality romantically, or as an old master. Or he made American pop art painted like Cézanne, thus causing a psychological disturbance, a break in the ability to emotionally cope with the image, because one's getting a double message all the time, or a contradictory message. And in the painting on the right, big grey robe, the drawing, in fact, could not be more banal. It is the same drawing that you would find in any bathroom shop where you go to pick your tiles. But it is painted with utter conviction, thus hopefully transforming it into another reality. I was in the Museum of Modern Art recently, where it was being exhibited, and I was charmed to see a mother and her young adult son looking at the painting. Well, he could have been her lover, but I assumed he was, being a conventional sort of guy, like I am. And I thought this, how nice that they're looking at the painting, and I thought it was so sweet. As they passed me, the mother said, "Some artists must be simple-minded." And in an interview recently, somebody asked me what I want people to think. And of course, I said, I don't want people to think anything in particular. It's like asking people what they would think when they listen to Mozart. But I probably don't want them to think that. But it does raise something very interesting about the painting, because the painting is, in a way, banal. It is ridiculous, because it is like something that you see on a subway wall or on a notice board, but yet it is subjected to a deep sense of romance. And I find the painting very emotional. I wanted also to talk about, to help you with the exhibition, now we get to the exhibition, I wanted to talk about paintings that have revision and don't have revision. The painting on the left is called Wall of Light, April. The painting on the right is called Raphael. What's interesting about the titles, I believe, is that the painting on the left relates to weather. In other words, it goes back to this conversation that I was having before about Constable and the impossibility of permanent light in that environment, and how Constable had to grab the light that was there at the time in a very instinctive way. The painting on the right, Raphael, took over a year to make and was the result of many revisions. The painting on the left, Wall of Light, April, was painted more or less in one go. I spend a lot of time getting ready. I mean, I walk around the painting for a few days, so if you count that, it takes a few days. But if you don't count that, it takes maybe a day. And there is something extremely instinctive about April. You can see the way that the brushwork at the bottom in particular is very aggressive and is hammering out the painting. The surface of the painting is extremely animated and the edges are more ragged than the edges on Raphael. It is a month that, of course, is famously quixotic, as we all know. And I painted it in April. I painted it under a skylight roof, and I did it in a day of extreme inspiration, in a very athletic process of running backwards and forwards in a great deal of excitement, and the painting was finished. And it has in it light, dark, and many, many greys, but the greys are not as complicated or as complex or as laminated as the greys in Raphael, which was the subject of many revisions. And as you see, if you look at Raphael, you'll see that the surface is considerably slower. It's a much more classicized painting. And here are two paintings side by side that seem to use the same vocabulary but have a different meaning. And this is what I mean by repetition, not repetition, or the expressiveness of something that is in fact a constant. So what I'm doing is I take something again and again and I remake it. I try to deepen my relationship with it and make it more consequent, which is a very similar enterprise to the one that was taken on by Cézanne. This painting on the left, which is not in the exhibition, is called Mosoirach, and it's the first painting I made when I moved into a studio in the country. So you can see from this painting how the environment changes what I do. The gaps in the painting are much bigger. If you look at the gaps between the grey and the green and the red on the right side of the painting, you'll see that a lot more of the background is coming through. And the painting has green in it. And I started to use green again when I moved into that studio. After not using green, I think, for quite a long time, because the paintings are very urban in a certain sense. They're urban in their structure, but they attempt to gather to themselves my life in some way, my passion, my love, my life, my memories, my feelings. And I try to animate a grid, the grid that we live in that very simple way, which is, of course, easier said than done. The painting on the right, which was also made in the countryside in Germany on a farm, is called Wall of Light Horizon. It's a very horizontal painting. Unfortunately, it's not in the show. But I wanted to show you two paintings that are deeply affected by a rural environment, that the romance of the painting becomes very powerful with the dark light, with the reds running through from the back and so on. Okay, 10 minutes to go. Then you can have a toilet break. So, Wall of Light, Desert Night on the left. Wall of Light, Desert Day on the right. Desert Day is not in the show. But I wanted to show something to help you to, in a way, enjoy the paintings. I wanted again to show something about the way I think of an environment, the way I throw an idea out. The paintings are very connected to the senses of the world. Even though a lot of my thinking was formed by minimalism. So the systemic part of the painting has something to do with my relationship with minimalism. The painting on the left, Desert Night, was again a painting that was made in a day. So it's quick, the brush strokes are very feathery, there's very little going back into the painting, as little as possible, because the more I go back into the painting, the more obviously the more layered the painting becomes and the slower it becomes. This painting on the right, Desert Day, is a painting that I made while I was thinking about Australia, which is where the painting lives, in fact, in the National Gallery. And it's light's not so good, but it has these deep red colors and these deep yellow ochre colors that I associate with the ground. I'm very interested in color that has a strong relationship to material, a color that gives light, that emanates light, but is somehow earthbound. And this I find very moving. Anyway, you'll see that both of these paintings are very rhythmical in the sense that the color is bashed down quite openly. There's a lot of stuff coming through from the back. Here I wanted to show you a painting from 79, which is a painting that I made 4 years after I arrived in the United States, in New York, that is, called Fort. These paintings were painted in my austere days, my monk-like days, and they were based on the Roman fort, divided into four, with 4 different zones that were made of alternate stripes. Painting on the right is in the show. It's called Night. And the reason I show this together is because I think that all the work that I did in the late 70s has its place in the present because of everything that I learned about black and about the night. And you will see, looking at my exhibition, that I make many references to place and time of day. Night and day mean very different things to me. Night being a time of solace and sadness. You will see that the painting on the right, which is in the exhibition, is a painting that can be seen, in a sense, in 2 ways. One way that the painting can be seen is as an exuberant painting of reds that has been slowly covered up, piece by piece, by a blanket of darkness, a loss of light, a sense of closure, a sense of falling light, of going down. Yet there is a very animated line running through it. So the background and the foreground, in a sense, are in a competition. And there always is this sense of pressure in my work. And there was in the 80s when the panels were bolted together, painted in a way like Van Gogh might paint. Everything in my paintings, like Van Gogh's paintings, who's my other hero, of course, is something. There aren't any negative spaces in my work. There's a kind of desperation, in a sense, desperation to fill in space. And to make a big painting with a passionate surface, as well as a small painting, of course, but it's easier on a small painting. Now I wanted to show you something about the watercolors, which are very important to me and became so after I visited Mexico. Watercolor on the left, which is called Wall of Light, is my most important watercolor. And that is a watercolor I made on the beach in Zihuatanejo in Mexico. And I'd been going around, I'd been looking at all the old buildings, the way that the paint falls off the side of old buildings, the way that the time of day changes what they are, makes them in a way into something sacred, but into something sacred that you can't define, which I like the best, since I have severe problems with the church. So basically, in a certain sense, I'm trying to make something sacred that is, in a way, secular, which is, of course, I understand, saturated with improbability. One on the right, I made same year, so that year I was really good to myself. The one on the right I made in Greece on Simi. And this is when I like to make these watercolors, when I go away, when I'm in a hot climate, and I tend to work very well with the sun and the shade. You can take them around with you. It's an old idea, of course, but the watercolors represent the extreme opposite of the paintings, and the paintings are saturated with weight. They are made with so much effort, so much devotion, and the watercolors are made with a sense of lightness, with no effort physically. And with a watercolor, you cannot make many revisions. So you have this quality of lightness of touch, lightness of being, and of course, the beautiful ragged edge. And as it sits humbly on the painting, it gives you an entirely different feeling from the paintings, which drag with them the weight of history as well as the weight of experience. Two pastels. One on the left is one that I am giving to the Met in honor of Bill Lieberman, who was the first person to buy one of my big paintings for a museum in America. And I always thought of him as a great man, not that friendly sometimes, but never mind, but a great man nevertheless, and his own man, which might also be said about me. So I think we make a pretty good fit. I've given that one to the Met. The one on the left, one on the right, sorry, is Chelsea 2104. It's another pastel that's in the show. I'm very interested in pastel, extremely difficult to do. You have to make them with your hands and you get it all everywhere. It goes in your ears, up your nose. It's terrible stuff, but it has a kind of obvious metaphysical appeal because it is, by virtue of its nature, out of focus. Like all otherness, it's out of focus. Painting on the left, these are the last two paintings I'm going to show you. Painting on the left is called Day Leaving, 04, made in the countryside again in the winter. Very sad painting, I believe, a kind of lamentation. Day leaving, meaning light leaving, life leaving, a moving into darkness, an abandoning of the vitality of the day, a letting go of hope, but not a hopeless painting. It's a giant painting, of course, like many of the paintings in the show. Painting on the right is 16 by 20 inches, and it's called Small Barcelona Painting 1, 29, 1999. And with these two paintings, I hope to show not only the difference in scale, but the difference in expressive possibility. With the same kind of material, one looks as if it was made on the beach and is just happy to be here, and the other one is sorrow personified. So anyway, I more or less have come to the end of my little talk, 3 minutes over time, not bad, just like the German train system. I wanted to tell you something that Picasso said. Picasso said many interesting things about art, and one of them was that the life of the painter is only really terrible for the first 30 years. And 2006 marks the 31st year since I arrived wide-eyed in New York. And it has, of course, been stringent, and so it should be, but it has also, I must say, been magnificent. Thank you for your attention.